We've been planning this for, what, 3 years?
Mm-hmm. 3 years.
3 years. We finally made it.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome.
Thank you.
To the show. Welcome to the Mind That You Go podcast, Sanya.
Thank you.
I would like to, I guess, to begin, by expressing a lot of gratitude for the role that you've had in my journey. And, it's an interesting dynamic, right? We were saying before we were recording here with the podcast, you talk and there's a different dynamic that enters with the kind of production of a podcast. And now I feel strangely shy sharing this with you in this container.
Mm-hmm.
But the immensity of the impact that you've had on my journey and my life over these last 3 years has been profound. And I mention you here and there in my work. I think mostly the synchronicity article was like a big area where I spoke about your influence, but it is impossible to summarize the impact that you've had and the impact that you continue to have on my path. And that's largely in part due to you being an inspiration and leading in many ways, and also showing me my potential, So I just wanted to begin on that note by expressing gratitude.
Thank you.
But I didn't want to get you all like emotional.
Well, it's too late.
Okay, right. So we're going to focus on a few various topics,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're going to let it flow. But what I would like to open with is the relationship between courage and love.
Mm-hmm.
And I see you as someone who's courageous. I see you as someone who knows and gets a good intuitive understanding of where you would like to go and where you would like to evolve. And I see firsthand the amount of courage that it takes often for you to do that. Could you maybe introduce your kind of journey and your background and how you've got to a more deliberate understanding of your path and a more deliberate understanding of your kind of spiritual calling?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the acknowledgement and for the love. And yeah, so my path has been a windy one, and it wasn't always clear the direction that I was going, especially in my 20s is when it became particularly messy. But there were always these vibrant breadcrumbs that I could follow, that I'd left for myself, right? And I knew that they were breadcrumbs because of what I'd experienced as a child, so other synchronicities. And to start off with, I grew up in Singapore and had a very beautiful childhood there. There were some dysfunctional family dynamics that I've experienced, as most families do. And those were the source of some limiting beliefs that were formed in me from a young age. And also the time where I received a lot of conditioning. But having said that, as a child, I was not a menace, but I was
not a menace. Good starting point.
But like I was very trusting of people and of life. And to have that as a child is quite a challenging thing, because the parents have the conditioning that the world is a dangerous place. And so that particularly affected my mum, as I would go missing regularly. And anyhow, we moved to England, and there I went to an amazing school that's called St. James Independent School for Girls. And there we were introduced to meditation at the age of 11. And the school had this Christian spin on it, and our headmistress was a Jewish woman, and we were learning Sanskrit and but still going to church and then meditating. And so there was a real richness in the spiritual dimension that was part of the context that was simply present as I was growing up. And it was not one that I paid very much attention to, actually. It was just kind of there. But still, somehow I kept finding myself winding up in like churches or kingdom halls or that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
So if it was with an ex-partner that was a Jehovah's Witness, I would go to whatever he was doing with his family, or a best friend or a close friend that was Greek Orthodox, and I would go to church with her. So there was this curiosity there, but it kind of seemed natural, and it wasn't something I was actively consciously pursuing. It was just kind of happening. What I was actively consciously pursuing was, apart from boys, was
wait, other boys? What do you mean? Sorry, I'll leave those kind of comments for private conversations.
It's okay, good. Yeah. So the other thing that I was pursuing actively was the concert experience, was going to gigs. And I was doing that with other people, but also alone, and hiding the fact that I was doing it so that I could keep going, just to go many times in the week. And I mentioned this because it was where I experienced my first kind of transcendental experiences. It was in the gig space. It was to music.
Yeah.
It was to being together with a group of people united in focus and intention. Yeah, and so this, at the time, I didn't know that that's what I was experiencing. I just had this elevation and an experience of extreme radiance, as well as the courage to go to these things and pursue these kinds of experiences without anyone knowing that I was doing it.
Which in itself, that's kind of could be an interesting symbol for like the seeker within, and like finding these different outlets.
Yeah, and so this was really powerful. And so the concert space was church for me. That's what it felt like, and I was in these spaces and experiencing surrender, experiencing what can be described as greater unity consciousness. I felt so open, so receptive. I felt held.
Could you explain what you mean by that? Like feeling held. What does that feel like for you?
I felt,
as an experience.
Yeah. So what
were you crowd surfing?
Okay, no. No, but I was holding on to people.
Surfing, yeah.
No. What I mean by I felt held was, as a child, first of all, the experiences that I've had with my conditioning created a loss of innocence there, and in the experiencing of gigs and being with crowds of people all there together for this one purpose, I was able to encourage the
that's Luna again. That's Luna making her cameo on the Mind That You Go podcast.
That's Luna, who is a dog digging into the sofa.
Luna. She'll settle soon. She'll try and take the limelight.
And so I was able to express this innocence there again. It felt like a playground, and going to school.
When does she ever do that?
She never does.
That's a rare occurrence for her to.
Can I just turn the camera?
Yeah, go for it. Luna, this is not your episode. Your episode's coming soon. Luna.
Hey, Luna. Stop.
This I think is something that a lot of people relate to, the concert experience and the different ways that we seek the transcendent, and a lot of the time it's an unconscious process where that mechanism isn't really understood as a spiritual or a so-called religious experience. It's just something that we innately know, and I guess that's why, it's because it's so innate. But it's like in some ways we've distanced ourselves from that and don't even recognize the substitutes, because the substitutes are just, they're natural, but then the thing we've disconnected from is natural. So we can't see when we've substituted a spiritual path from an actual spiritual experience, or like a anti-religious sentiment for another form of transcendence. Is she still scratching away? All right, we'll keep going.
Yeah, but that's also this power of being able to harmonize with a group of people vibrationally, you know, and music is one really powerful way to do that. Obviously, when you go to a church and there is a pastor giving a sermon, that is also creating this kind of focus, and
yes,
his words are there also to kind of like gather everybody's focus into a more kind of unified, harmonious, vibrational expression, you know. And in the concert experience, what becomes so powerful is like, it's like you've listened to this music at home on your own. It's like being in bed and reading your Bible, you know, but you're listening to music, you're listening to music, you're listening to music. And then you go to this place and so many people have gathered. And then this frequency, this vibration that you've been exposing yourself to in your privacy, with yourself, maybe with some friends, all of a sudden is being transmitted to this huge crowd of people. And there is like this experience of rejoicing, you know, and an elevation is then allowed because everybody is allowing their vibrancy, they're allowing their own frequency to be harmonized to that which they've been listening to for however long, as well as to the people in the space. And it creates this experience that for me, I can only liken to a sense of oneness. You know, that's the closest thing.
I want to pick up as well on you're using words like harmonize and vibration and frequency, right? And some people, a lot of people might associate that with like new age thinking as descriptors, but there's so much scientific evidence, like the Heart Math Institute, they look into this as well. There's a lot of scientific evidence for the way that we literally harmonize in musical settings, in musical concerts. The heart rate of an audience, and in theater as well, we might have discussed, I'm going to like share stuff with you, but Ricky, you've told me that like 5 times already. But the heart rate and the brain frequency of the crowd harmonizes in music, in theater. It's exceptional to understand this. Like, you know, when people try and decouple science and spirituality, or they see them as rigidly two things, this intuition around vibration and harmony is almost like a literal translation of the field that we are, the electromagnetic, the sound, like sound. So you do a lot of sound healing. I feel like we will jump around your journey, but you understand intuitively the power of sound, right? In terms of harmonizing consciousness.
Yeah. And we also have a very kind of a positive response to the experiencing of harmony. You know, there is a general kind of aversion towards chaos and disharmony that we as beings experience individually, also collectively. And so when you enter a space, there's also the intent, and it may be subconscious, but the intention is also to harmonize, you know, is also to be together. So you know you're going to a concert, so you know you're going to be together.
Together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's beautiful. Yeah. Together. And that is like a precursor to a heart-opening experience. You're setting yourself up for a heart-opening experience. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the power of communion.
Union of the community. I'm just sat here like deconstructing language. But yeah, it is right. It's that like shared, that's what like a religious experience is in many ways. It's like a shared intention to have an experience in community. I mean, also spirituality can be highly personal and highly subjective. But there is this, you mentioned the word elevation, like elevation above the individual, that is an integral aspect, and music and sound does seem to have a real effect on us.
Yeah. There's a great example of like harmonizing or getting into a vibe with people, and that's the example of drugs, right? So like, until you have cultivated a certain amount of ability to detach, so before that kind of cultivation, if you're in a group of people and all of them are drunk or starting to drink, you will feel that there is a some form of dissonance going on. It may not be conscious. Your mind may not be like, oh yeah, I feel some dissonance going on, but something will happen, you know. Or same thing if you're sober and people are smoking weed. A similar experience then comes on, because you can feel that they're shifting in frequency. They're having a co-creative experience with a substance that is reconfiguring their signature, their frequency, their consciousness, their state. They're going into an altered state, which is an altered frequency, you know? And so often when people smoke together, or when people take mushrooms together and that kind of thing, then they experience themselves having the same trip. They're on the same trip because they remain harmonized.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are not part of that substance consumption, you will feel that there is a shift in frequency, especially if there's attachment to being involved. You know, there is the absolute ability to detach from that, and then to choose. You can choose the frequency. You can create yourself.
Yeah. So just to unpack that, so you're talking to this, you know, the detachment from like the spiritual equanimity, and the ability to not be influenced. So if there's like dissonance, to be okay with the dissonance, and then to say, well, is the frequency that I am, is that a chosen frequency? And this language feels so relevant for this talk right now, but this is a chosen frequency. Do I comply and be influenced, or do I influence? And as is present in my mind right now, again, the heart math work, they've done a lot of stuff with the electromagnetic fields of the heart and the brain. They also show how cultivating loving kindness and compassion changes that frequency. So it's almost like you can experience dissonance and then make that choice when you're detached as like a spiritual practice.
Yeah. I mean, essentially being able to, first of all, acknowledge if there is attachment is a space that starts to create detachment, you know. Firstly, there's noticing that there is some form of attachment, maybe to being harmonized with a group of people in this example. I have to belong, or I want to be included. But then, so noticing that thought already is a thought that creates separation, right? It creates further distance. It acts as a resistor. It creates a barrier between you and that which you wish to be included in, you know? And so, first of all, being able to accept that is present. And I'm reading a book. I know I told you earlier, but I'm reading a book called Whatever Arises, Love That. But like literally, so there's that feeling of tension, or that arises from the wish to be included and feeling excluded, or wishing to harmonize and feeling disharmonized and dissonant. to love that, to love whatever arises, or even simply just accept that that's there, see it, acknowledge it, bring it into the conscious part of your awareness.
Yeah.
And through being able to see it, the detachment around it, it loosens, it has space, you know, and it gives you more choice again. And in that choice, you get to start to choose your frequency. Resistance to what is a frequency choice. You can choose to resist the fact that you feel the disharmony, and that is a choice of who it is that you're being. But once you see that, you can loosen all of that and choose to be okay with the difference in frequency, which creates greater harmony, actually.
True
which
harmony.
is like we've experienced also going out with people, and they've been partying and, you know, consuming. And maybe I had one drink, but you didn't. And we were totally chilled, you know, to be able to be there, because it did not matter. It no longer matters, you know.
I find as well, like in that, I've not been drinking alcohol for over 3 years now, but I get almost drunk in like from music, you know, in that kind of, especially electronic music, especially on a night out, where the trance-like quality of the music is a state altering experience. And this goes back pretty much throughout the history of humankind. I'd imagine, like using music as a kind of ritualistic. So we just lost connection briefly, just because I can get away with this on audio only. I can just edit it easier if something like this happens, but on video it's more obvious. So we dropped out for a second. But this, like for me, I also have gone through the stage of live music and enjoying the kind of high of that experience and feeling that with the crowd. But the immersion into nightlife, like particularly in Berlin, but also in my university days as well, that was an experience of something truly transcendent that probably, it came before my spiritual awakening. You know, it was a transformative experience to be immersed in that kind of environment. Can you remind me what we were talking about before that I started talking about the electronic music and the effects and the tribalism?
Yes. So we were talking about frequency, harmony, detachment, being able to then choose your vibe, that you're able to actually, you have a say in creating harmony, even when other people are at a different frequency, because ultimately harmony does not require you to be in the same frequency as somebody else. You don't have to be, you know, on this level, let's say, like vibrating here. You don't have to be here, but you can be here, and it can be beautiful, right? It can sound harmonious, just like you may have two voices in a choir, the altos and the sopranos. They're different, but they create harmony, they create beauty together, they create something symphonic together, right? And so that's the same with humans. And also a lot of how teams work. Teams work in harmony with each other. They're not the same person over and over again, like they said, carbon copies of each other. No, you know, a lot of teamwork is actually about creating harmony through accepting differences in frequency, differences in energetic signatures, differences in vibes, differences in ways of doing things, how you run energy through you.
You're making me kind of view this like the intuition I have around this slightly differently.
Okay.
In terms of that, when I've experienced harmony in a collective setting, there is probably an assumption for me that it is because everyone's leveled, but I think you're right. You know, it's not necessarily that. It's the way that it's the leveling process. It's the mix. It's the synthesis of these different layers that creates the harmony. But then don't you find it so interesting? Like, I feel like we spoke about empaths the other day, and how that can come from adapting to your environment when you're younger. And you know, through this lens, an empath is someone who's highly influenced by the vibration, the frequency, the harmony of other people, to the extent that they feel like they don't have any control. and those external influences are the dominion of their own frequency.
Yeah.
And I love what you're talking about, because this is part of the spiritual work, isn't it? It's part of the inner sovereignty of cultivating your own state, and kind of working with your environment. How do you manage, like, in situations, how do you discern when you're in a situation and you're aware, you're like, okay, I'm operating at a different level right now, like I'm more energized in this environment, or this person that I'm with, or I'm more lethargic. We experience this a lot, right? This kind of, we have to adjust to each other sometimes when we see each other, and we kind of speak through this as well a lot of the time. But how do you discern, like, okay, this is what's, I wish to choose to change how I am, or I wish to choose to remain connected to how I am, and accept that? Like, how, have you got a process that you
just said it. You literally just said the process.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It is one of accepting. Just accepting. Like, first and foremost, the discernment comes from, first of all, accepting what is. If I'm in resistance to what is, then I create greater disharmony, and I'm not able to discern, actually, because I'm not acknowledging the resistance. The first the first kind of tension point, the most obvious, the external layer of tension, which is a denial or aversion towards perceived dissonance. And that can be perceived dissonance between two people. You're in one vibe, I'm in another vibe. If I'm in resistance towards that I'm creating more disharmony. But egoically, I can choose to actually make you wrong, because of my attachment to harmony, which creates disharmony. And so if I accept, if I take ownership, if I am self-honest and transparent and can actually say, yeah, okay, there is some resistance coming up, or I feel a little pang of some frustration. As soon as I'm able to see that, I can accept it, and I don't have to react from there. I can create a different kind of a response. It's a creative space awareness that provides creative spaces, opportunities for greater creative responding. And being able to, first of all, acknowledge what it is that I am being, who it is that I am being, positive or negative, it doesn't really matter, right? But this is a good example of that, of exactly what we're talking about. So we've lost connection twice, right? And there can either be resistance and frustration can come up around that, and we can pretend that there isn't that present, and energetically we'll be able to pick up the frustration from one another.
Oh, this is beautiful. We're getting meta. I love it.
Yeah. But we're here to actually do the work, and this is an example of being given an opportunity. Life is rich with these moments where we can take something that is perceived as a inconvenience, or something that we can get frustrated over, but actually use it as something that is given to us and placed in our growth zone, and so how are we going to be? It could be that now you have more editing work to do, so frustration might come up and be like,
you can do it, you know how to edit, you can do it. Sanya, come on.
No. But you know what I mean, right? Like, so you can either go into the frustration of it all, or just accept what arises. And see, what is the gift in this? What is the gift in this? Creating more detachment, allowing for greater detachment to come in. And then again, attachment to detachment creates despondency. Attachment
to detachment creates despondency.
So
when you become like attached to a concept of being someone who's detached, rather than practicing a kind of equanimous approach.
It does. And often on the spiritual path, there is a pendulum swing. And that's okay to not have a problem with that. to be able to accept that too, if that's what's happening, to just
Yeah.
see, okay, yeah, I guess I'm kind of in a more detached space. And then we
Yeah.
learn lessons about detachment there. Those are important lessons that we learn in the full pendulum swing. And then as we recenter ourselves to be able to be detached to the fact that we are attached,
And this, so one thing that and in Buddhism, and I feel like Buddhism is such a beautiful practical philosophy, particularly around equanimity and the middle way, and it's beautiful in how it articulates that. And in Buddhism, they talk about the near enemies. I want to say the near enemies. It's basically a way that they describe the near enemies of equanimity. I've written an article about this. I have to link it somewhere. And apathy is one. And it is. And I think when people that aren't as initiated might not fully grasp this concept of detachment as like a healthy thing, because it can, and I've been there where it becomes apathy, and I've leaned into detachment, like reducing my social contact, like meditating much more, creating some form of distance from the world. And I think it's a really essential part of the practice, part of the spiritual evolution. You kind of need that insight, spell of insight, and kind of return into the world. But it can make you apathetic in the wider perspective of a spiritual path, but also, and we're talking about this example of being detached. So if you're in a situation where there's like a certain energy with that, certain vibration in that area, I'm talking from experience, right? As an empath, being really sensitive to energy, and then for me, meditation being this like, oh wow, I'm cultivating states myself. Like it was beyond the mental. It wasn't just like changing thought. I was there, like I'm sat here with my eyes closed, and I'm cultivating a feeling of compassion. That's a game changer. That for me was like, I've just cultivated a state myself. And going from state cultivation to, or being heavily influenced by other people's state, and then state cultivation, then led to what you're saying around this like attachment to detachment, because I would be reluctant if I was then in environments that started to influence me. Because my understanding is that you have to cultivate this connection to the extent where the strength of that allows you not to be influenced so much, and that's part of the process. So I would find myself in situations where I would be practically apathetic, because I would be like, I've just cultivated it. And I think a lot of people get this in spiritual practice, right? I've cultivated stillness. I feel really peaceful when I'm in my meditation or doing yoga. But then I go out into the world and I converse with people. And then we have the choice. Like it's either all their fault or there's just more work to be done. The opportunity, just with the lost connection, has presented itself to practice. How do I harmonize? How do I cultivate this state of love, stillness, or compassion, or any other spiritual kind of essence?
Yeah, it's a beautiful exploration. I find that I've also had similar experiences where I have created these expansive, insightful state changes that are of my own choosing in the privacy of my own space. And then having the belief that, or making the external world wrong, making community wrong, or other people wrong, because so what I mean by making them wrong is having resistance towards these the external world outside of my four walls, that is. And because in truth it feels that they do have an influence, right? That I am not actually strong enough, I'm not convinced enough of my own ability to choose my state, right? And that has been my conditioning. If you have grown up as a people pleaser, you will be very sensitive to your environment and know who to be and what to say for them, and not be able to stand strong in yourself. and be the influence.
All the interruptions. This is the universe, is like, Ricky, practice working with frustration. Because I know we're kind of, it's like if we're composing right now, we're trying all these different instruments and we're trying to like create that coherency between it, because I keep jumping back. I just wanted to say, because it's relevant and it's in my mind, because when we got the connection back last time and you said about frustration and things dropping out and that being an opportunity to practice, I think we both work with this, right? It's not that, like, the thoughts come to me, I don't choose them. I don't choose, like, the thoughts like, oh God, here we go. Like, is this like what, all these kind of self-defeating thoughts, they enter my conscious mind, and the choice is not to pay attention to them, almost just like, with the state. And I think you're moving in this direction as well, of like state cultivation and being connected to yourself is also an integral part of being authentic. And there's like an act of courage in that, in terms of being, actually, I feel great right now and some good things are going on in my life. I want to share that, even if this person's triggered by it, for example. Or I'm not feeling so good and I'm entering an environment where everyone seems to have their shit together and they seem to be really happy. I have to put on a smile and deviate from what feels true.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a link between those kind of different elements of the authenticity, courage, and not only the state. Sanya, this is like, I feel like all the conversations we've had at once, like, I just want to go off on so many tangents.
I feel you.
Do you feel? Yeah. So like, anyone listening and watching, if this is a bit all over the place, we also have to harmonize like how we focus our our conversation, because there's just so much I want to share with you, because I know how wise you are and like the conversations that we have. But this, because we spoke about the theme of courage, and it's kind of come back in terms of, that's an element, right? In terms of, you need courage to cultivate a state and honor that state, or honor that way of being, when faced with external influence.
Yeah. Like, one thing to when you look at the natural world, it becomes so clear that courage, okay, so the word courage for us humans implies having to overcome fear. It just implies that fear is present, and so we have to engage with an aspect of ourselves that has the power to act despite what we're thinking and what we're feeling. That's courage. And as long as we are human, we will be practicing courage. But when you look at the natural world, for example, a bird just leaps off of a branch and free falls, swooping up before hitting the ground, or a fly or a mosquito. Maybe it's ignorance too, but they just wander into my space, not knowing that there's a murderous being whose territory. Yeah, and I will swat them and they will return. And I'm like,
what are you doing? Is that courage?
Yeah.
Stupidity, what are they?
Yeah, but there is, like, even in plants, the way that plants grow, there is this kind of acceptance of what is, that can be looked at, that can be seen as courage. The natural world is courageous. It is, but the thing is that it doesn't have such a developed concept of fear as humans do. And so what the natural world actually is fearless. And then it has moments of courage. For example, if like two dogs encounter each other and there's actually something that presents some kind of danger.
Then like an immediate physical threat compared to a lot of our like mental
psychological
imagery. Psychological,
yeah. But the natural world is just fearless. It's courageous. I'm actually fearless.
I'm going to drop in a question, like quite a big question.
Okay.
is God courageous?
No. And
So
yes.
like what is it with humanity? Because courage, it feels like such an integral part of, I want to say, becoming God, or like
Yes.
or like be, you know, embodying the divine and
Yes.
embodying divine values. And you know, I've been on a bit of a Plato hype recently. I had the conversation with Bethany around the theory of forms. So I think it was Plato or Socrates when they're talking about virtues and how to embody different virtues. Either or both, one of them said that courage is almost the primary virtue. And it's the primary virtue because you have to have courage in order to enact all other virtues. So I wonder if, because I know exactly what you mean, like in a kind of animal kingdom, it's like immediate primal fear or beingness.
Yes.
And that seems to be the two states. Whereas humans, we have this like, courage is almost that bridge between choosing to move beyond either self-imposed fear or societal fear or limitations.
Exactly. And ultimately all of that fear lives within us. It's something that we have to be courageous, not with the world, but with our own self-image, with the willingness to die to who it is that we have been, you know, because we have the identity that if we want to expand, and then the natural principle that exists throughout creation is expansion. You know, but every time we expand, we create an identity, and then we have to use courage in order to like break through and have a mini death, and then and expand, and then again we've got to engage with courage to take another step into our boldness, into our ability to express ourselves, and the ability to use our voice, and the ability to loosen our bodies, and the ability to embody something that feels more light and more true and more authentic and more vulnerable, or whatever, you know. But but a caterpillar that is going into its cocoon to completely deconstruct into a ball of goo and then become a butterfly at the other end of it is just doing it. You know, it's doing it. It's going into this cocoon and it's dying to itself and becoming an airborne creature, you know. It's having a different amount of legs, different body configuration. It's just like, you know. But it's just.
Did you just do everything?
Yes, I did. Yeah. But that's so beautiful. Whereas if a human was supposed to go into a cocoon and completely deconstruct, no, like the existential crisis and the amount of other humans it would take to get this person into its cocoon, like it's, you know. But that is part of our humanness. Part of our humanness is actually understanding the nuances around fear, and how fear ends up being a catalyst to more nuanced experiences of love. And so that is the richness that fear presents, and that is the teacher that fear is for us. You know, it's a gift. And again, God knows about fearlessness. Look outside. God is fearless. This whole creation exists because God is fearless. It's messy, it's chaotic, and the humans need to constantly engage with courage. That's so powerful. You know. But there is some beauty in it because the creator is learning through nuance. That's why there is the Shakti. That's why there is infinite expressions of the creator. Infinite. So that it can gather the most data about itself, because the creator is kind of self-indulgent. Like, you know?
I love this exploration. I wonder if the process of the biological, right? I was listening to a podcast. It was a Joe Rogan podcast. I apologize, people. I listened to Joe Rogan. Okay, I'm just putting that out there. It was a Joe Rogan podcast with Jordan Peterson, another person that might switch a few people off. I happen to love his approach to these things. And Brett Weinstein, who's an evolutionary biologist. And they were talking about, it's similar, like the choice. We've got a choice to overcome our own biology. And essentially, Brett Weinstein was saying that if you talk exclusively about biology, you're going to be politically incorrect, because biology doesn't care for a lot of the values that we uphold, a lot of the morals that we uphold. So if you're a good biologist and you're just speaking about your discoveries, you're going to be labeled as someone who's politically incorrect. Now, that is a fascinating idea of this balance between the biological and our ability to transcend, analyze, and explore. Are those biological mechanisms desirable for greater unity, greater sense of civilization and connection? Do I follow these biological impulses, or do I choose to transcend them? And I wonder if, on some level, it's the bridge between the biological embodying the divine that requires courage, because to create in a more godlike way, a more purposeful way of directing consciousness, we have to tether both. We have to work with our biology in a way that animals don't. And we have to direct our consciousness, and in becoming gods, we have to enact that courage to overcome and to assess and to be really deliberate about how do we want to be. Because fear, really, like this might be oversimplified, but don't you find that this is possibly really oversimplified, but a lot of the time, if not all the time, fear is almost pointing you in the right direction. And I mean that in terms of how difficult, even me just saying I listen to Joe Rogan, I'm like, oh man, like people might bring out their own kind of assumptions about that. Speaking the truth brings up fear. You know, in actually being authentic in the world we're in brings up fear. So it's almost like that courage is required to actually enact and to saturate the world with the divine. Does that make sense? That kind of...
It does make sense. It does make sense. And I agree. It is like when you look at humans, you know, and with a lot of love, it becomes very evident that most humans carry a limiting belief, which is that they are unworthy and that they are separate from God. And so this is something that comes in like a thief in the night in early childhood. And it is generally the pain of separation is something that we're born with, because we experience the veil and feel that we are severed from God, right? And so that separation ends up being the basis for our fear. That unworthiness too becomes the basis for our fear. And so every time we take a step into what is more creatorship, becoming closer to God in our expression, in our vibrance, and our radiance, we meet fear. We meet fear because it is an indicator of the aliveness of the living belief of unworthiness and separation. If we knew, I posted something on Instagram today, and I can't remember what it was, but I think it was something like,
I think I saw this.
Yeah, about like when everybody realizes their God shit's gonna get real, you know, something like that. But like, we're moving towards greater unification, and we do have the divine impulse to expand. But we're also born into this belief that we are separate from God. And so as we expand, we meet ourselves on the threshold of the known, because we haven't learned that the mystery that we are beyond that threshold is us. You know, we feel like we're moving into the unknown, but we're actually moving into the greater truth of ourselves. And if we actually had the integrated understanding and belief that we are one with God, that there is no separation, then we experience fearlessness, the ability to be surrendered, not learn to surrender, but we become surrender, we become faith, we become fearless. But in the process of becoming, we're still learning, you know. And humans, the beautiful thing also about humans is that I'm going to just use terminology from the Law of One, Book of Ra, which is that we're at a different density of consciousness than the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, so on.
Yeah.
You know, so we do have, we are more dense in consciousness. So we carry more consciousness, more light. And that is an advantage, a seeming advantage, and a disadvantage if we are going to judge it. Ultimately, it just creates a more nuanced learning. It's a different density. It creates more nuanced learning. And the creator learns a lot about itself through the veil of separation. You know, it's such a rich playground. It's such a rich playground for actually learning the lessons of love. And that is what humanity is doing right now.
Yeah.
You know, it is moving from the personal into the heart. Collectively, we're moving from the personal into the heart. So identity crisis galore.
Yeah.
You know.
And also through that process, an increased rigidity, or even a more kind of deliberate attempt to crystallize identity in that, like, feeding that kind of crisis to be like, no, this is really who I am, kind of doubling down on that, maybe that illusion. Sorry, did I interrupt you then with a thread?
No.
You were talking about this, and something that came to mind was, as we're exploring courage, to pretty much like a known extent, or like what we're aware of, humans are capable, unlike other animals, to experience psychological suffering. So we experience, because I say that, and I don't say that so confidently, because animals grieve, for example. So there's an inbuilt primal experience of loss, of love, you know, community, kind of shared bonds between animals and, was it swans? They stay together for life, don't they?
Do they? Is it swans? Albatrosses do.
Albatross eye.
It was an albatross eye situation.
But with this exploration, maybe that also plays into, like, because there's a threat of, you mentioned, of dying to yourself, the need to die to the past self, to die to the image of who you are. That psychological death is really painful. And as far as we're aware, humans are the only species that are able to do that. We've got a psychological concept of self. We've got a psychological awareness around the fact that this is a body that is going to die. So there's also a really primal and innate fear of death that is really actually in the shadow of the collective, and repressed a lot, this like innate fear of death. But also the fear of psychological death, and like, what is it, is that classic anxiety, like the causes of anxiety in public speaking is like above death pretty much, because of the social death and the psychological turmoil that can come from feeling rejected. So I wonder if that's also why courage as a mechanism has developed, because we can die to ourselves before the body dies. And that is the greatest fear, right? To confront a psychological or spiritual death.
Yeah.
And that requires courage.
Yeah. There are people out there that would prefer, have the preference of actually dying a physical death over dying a psychological death, you know, because it is painful, you know, because there is even more uncertainty. There's even more uncertainty if you die to yourself psychologically, then who are you? Yeah. You know, and there is this fear of death that you talk about that is so prevalent in our collective psychology, is also pointing to a recent exploration of mine, which is around safety and the inherent unsafety that we feel collectively that we're not acknowledging. We all feel unsafe. If we felt really safe, we wouldn't have all of these strategies. We wouldn't constantly be telling half truths. We wouldn't constantly be trying to hold up a particular kind of self-image. You know, we wouldn't be giving more power to our self-image than our authentic expression and our radiance. We wouldn't be trying to please people all the time. We would be more heart-centered and honest and open, you know, and yeah. And so that is the current challenge that we have presented ourselves collectively as the next evolution point, to be able to become courage. And courage has to do with the heart. It's related to the heart, right?
Do you know the
Cool.
etymology? Yes, yeah, there you go. Yeah, cool. Yeah.
And your cœur, your heart, that's French, right? That's the heart is your core.
Yeah.
You know?
Beautiful.
And so what does it mean for all of us to actually be honorable? What is honor to us? And it's a beautiful investigation. Excuse me. And it's not so easy to listen to the heart, because love has learned how to speak quietly. It's much more in the background, because fear has been practiced being loud. It's the only way that fear can win. Fear wins through loudness. It's the only way. Otherwise you move from your heart, you know. But if you move from your heart, you're constantly going to be putting your identity, your ego, your self-image at risk. Constantly, you know. But that is what heart-centered living is about. It is about that willingness to not know who you're going to be at the other end of an experience, you know, but to trust it. And that safety that I was talking about before, it's this basic trust in life that is missing. Our collective knows how to look like it's safe. You can go to a situation like, you know, there are times, for example, where you've gone into rooms or bars and things like that. I have this too. And you can sense the insecurity present that no one's talking about. And all the strategies to look safe. I have those strategies too, you know? Yeah. And had to really, really like acknowledge, I don't actually feel safe, but I'm really good at looking like I do. And as we talked about before, like the creation of who it is that we are, the creation, you can give yourself, you can cultivate a state. And so what would it look like for every individual human collectively to cultivate safety first and foremost, to actually get that they are safe? Because it is through understanding that you are safe that you give yourself the permission to open your heart. And it is through understanding that you are safe that you are able to open your heart, and you're able to die to yourself, because you're safe to die to yourself. As long as you believe that you are unsafe, you will not be able to die to yourself. Or you will, but it's just going to be a lot more painful than if you just trusted the process. We cause ourselves more suffering because we don't acknowledge the root of the problem, and that is our unsafety. That comes from this belief that we are disconnected from God and that we are unworthy of love.
Coffee in inconvenient time. I am emotional as well, but I sound more emotional because my throat. But one thing, this is making me think of, like you said, with the music experience, you felt held. And it's this this feeling of feeling held that is very much part of the process. I'm gonna have to have some water because my throat is like getting all emotional. So gonna make me cry in the podcast. What are you doing? There you go. This link between feeling held, feeling a connection to God. You spoke about fear and separation as well, as a strong link. We've convinced ourselves of our separation, of our unworthiness. And yet, when we feel connected to God and we feel held by God as an experience, as an embodiment, not as like some high concept idea that we have to behave in a very set way to be supported by God, but an actual surrendering into that holding, right? There's an element of safety that comes from that is, I would say, been castrated from society. And I use that word consciously because the way in which this has been taken from society, I believe, is the root cause of many of our issues. when we look at the pandemic as well, you know, and I'll get angry if I get I'll get angry as well as other emotions, but the way in which fear is perpetuated by the media and by governments to convince the masses that they are not safe, be it from a virus, be it from their economical destruction, be it from themselves and their own stupidity or their own ignorance, you know, we also have to confront that without, you know, Nietzsche said his concern, like, God is dead and we have killed him. Well, what do you replace that with? We're trying to replace it with a science, but not actual science, like scientific dogma. And we think that science will save us. We think that science is going to give us safety. If only we have enough data, if only we have enough experts working on the cure, then we'll be safe. Then we can channel, just like the substitute of a gig is substituting that divine kind of yearning. I feel like a lot of that currently is going towards science, or the high-end concept of the perfect science that is dogmatic. The reason that I bring this up is that there's such a beautiful link. I love how these conversations unfold, and like the harmony, and we talk about resonance of the heart, of music, of all this stuff kind of coming together. And as you say, core, which is not the French accent, but there you go, that being heart-centered. And when you were saying that, I really felt that, like, courage is moving from here to here. Courage is moving from here to here, and actually being like true to the essence of being. Well, I was on a run this morning, and like creative thoughts going through my mind, and something that came up was like, I yearned for the day that humanity honors natural law, like the spiritual essence of being, nature's laws, rather than honoring the economy, honoring the quest of power, or all this bullshit. And I don't mean that from like a really oversimplified, like, oh yeah, because obviously we spoke about biology and the need to transcend that. But I mean like a deep-rooted understanding of exactly the stuff that you're saying with courage and with heart-centered living. It's the bridge between from here to here, from the mind-made catastrophe that is also infiltrated and indoctrinated by a society that thrives on fear for the benefit of the few. I'm getting all political now, Sanya. This is what you do to me. But there you go.
That's okay. Well, one thing that I feel like comes out of all of this is that there is undeniably a shift happening in the collective, and we are moving into our hearts, you know, and no matter what is happening on the political stage, it will act as a catalyst for this collective awakening that is simply what is. It is simply what is happening. So anything that happens ultimately is going to just be a catalyst. Anything that happens, greater fear, greater all of this kind of stuff, you know, like it is. So when I was in 2014 to 2015, I experienced psychosis for 4 days. And it was the most intense fear that I have ever experienced. But it was on the 4th day of such intense fear that I realized that I am not that fear. But I don't think I would have had such a catalytic expansion in my own consciousness, my own awareness of myself, had I not had this experience of compounding fear to the point where I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was hearing voices. I was so terrified. And just had this question, like a very genuine whisper, you know, which was, is this you? Is this really you? Is this how you think about yourself? Is this you? Is this me? And I remembered myself as a child, and I was like, absolutely fucking not. No, I accept that this is happening, but also no, I love myself. I love being alive. I love life. I love people. This whole fear-based thing is not me. I could disassemble the cloak of fear that I had built. You know, I could renounce it, but I had to first realize it, acknowledge it as influences that I had allowed to come in, you know, and give my power to and believe in, like thoughts or opinions and such, you know. But again, my awakening was catalyzed because of what felt like an insurmountable amount of fear, and then boop, expansion on the other side. You know, I must have died.
Died to yourself. This, building on that metaphor from earlier, it does seem to be the case that, as you've experienced and I've experienced as well, this amplification, like this idea of for me, like this idea of mental illness being like just somehow separate from the rest of the human experience, like that makes no sense to me, part of the continuum. And I feel like these extremes, when you get to the extreme, because it's so amplified in your consciousness, then you cannot avoid it. It's amplified, you can't avoid it, and the only option then is to see it fully. And as you experience, like, one option is to die to it, to understand that this isn't me. Because it's like, you know this from like meditation, like in the beginning when you meditate, you know, it might be that your thoughts are really loud, that there's a lot of emotional stuff going on. It's pretty easy to detect that when you're meditating. You might just get distracted, have a busy mind. It's when you get to you evolve your practice and you get to the real subtleties. It's almost like mental activity itself, if we continue with that analogy of sound, like just slight, like they can be like really loud, like the culture of hysterical shouting from the media, like capital letters, like NHS messaging people in all capitals and stuff like that, you know, it's just shouting at you, fear. And that internalization, to be with that, is really upsetting and unsettling.
Yes, it's invasive.
It's invasive because it follows that metaphor of noise, doesn't it? And when we think of stillness and how do you quieten the mind?
Yeah, well, that's also a beautiful exploration. You know, it's one. When you put a TV in your house, you're basically putting another family member in there. You know, you're basically your phones and the televisions are something that you have an intimate relationship with. And as soon as the TV is on and you're in the safety of your own home, the perceived safety of your own home, you're in a passive receiving state, you know, and so you can be told whatever, and unless you are actually engaged, it's like when you invite someone in your house, you can have an engaging conversation, but the relationship with the TV is one of passivity. It's not that you're being told information, you're like, no, and then you start having a conversation. That's not what happens, right? That's not how we're programmed to relate to the television. And so we're able to receive a lot of conditioning, a lot of programming through this very intelligent tool that is very powerfully developed as a tool of influence, you know, and simultaneously, and so constantly the TV is crossing boundaries with us. It's crossing boundaries, but we don't know.
Hyperviolence and all that.
We don't know that that is a relationship, first of all, and that it's important to have boundaries in all relationships, especially with one where it's pretty one way. You know, imagine you having like this uncle that comes into your house and never stops talking. You can't get a word in. Whatever he says, you just have to take. You know. So there is this we open ourselves up, and we are subconsciously choosing that, you know, by putting our TV in our house. We're saying yes to the programming. That is our choice. It may be done from ignorance, but we are still choosing it, and it is still our responsibility.
Yeah.
You know? So however that tool is used, okay.
Yeah.
You put the TV in your home. So you allowed yourself to say, okay, whatever is coming out of this, I will be influenced by, or you learn to have a discerning relationship with this information thing. You know?
Yeah, this it's a really powerful point, because I think it is essential when we talk, you know, we're talking about the lived experience of influence, and, you know, actually being in your environment and being influenced, but the cultural, the societal mechanisms that, conditioning is the perfect word, like the way that we're conditioned is, as you point out, to on some level be the receivers of information without discernment, to just receive information a lot of the time unconsciously or subconsciously. And it really is a process, because obviously some of this sounds a bit conspiratorial, but ultimately culture is shaped by a very narrow corridor of information. And there are stuff on the fringes. Fringes is a word that's used a lot at the moment, like these fringe scientists or fringe thinkers or whatever. But this idea that, I'm going to mix my metaphors now, but in this corridor, there's a mainstream, a stream of information. And that's with us when we enter those rooms. Energetically, television, media, they have an impact for sure. Like if you're consuming fear-based media, you're going to physiologically feel, because it convinces your mind, it affects your mind, and your mind is then affecting your body.
Absolutely.
And the same without discernment, if you internalize cultural messaging, and it's not that all of this is deliberately constructed to make you think in a certain way necessarily. Even the implicit biases of filmmakers, for example, they perpetuate certain stereotypes, whatever. Some stuff is a lot more deliberate. Like you just look at Cambridge Analytica, the use of social media, which is an extension of the media shaping public opinion around policy and around who you vote for, you know, stuff like that. But point being, the external noise, which is very loud, can become part of your internal landscape. And you have to kind of learn how to adjust the dial a little bit, and to be really conscious of, what am I being influenced by? How is it influencing me? And how do I respond to that information and the noise? Yeah. And how does that relate to fear, and what do I have to overcome? What does the heart say? What does the heart say in those situations? Yeah, but the heart becomes so quiet in those situations, because the identity is so used to being formed through this information. So that's the beautiful thing also about the word information, right? Because your information, whatever it is that you are consuming, is forming you. You will take that shape. You may not be agreeing with it consciously, but subconsciously, it's very likely that you will be, unless you're conscious of the relationship you have with the television. If you're not conscious of that, if you're not aware, if there isn't the ability to discern when you're sat with your screen, then it will most likely be forming you. And I also, just a side note, my sister is a filmmaker, you know, and I know, like, so there is a lot of stuff that is created, a lot of content that's created from heart and from artistry and from love. And my brother's a musician, and similarly, like, so am I. And a lot of music is made with love and with heart. But that doesn't mean that all music and all films and all are made free of the desire to condition. Like there's product placement, a lot of product placement, for example. That is a form of psychological manipulation. Yeah. You know, it is. Yeah. And same with commercials. It's also a form of psychological manipulation. Yeah. Advertising industry, beauty industry, like beauty standards themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
How people are represented and
totally, exactly. And you don't know, like, what you're agreeing to when you're watching a commercial, for example, of anti-aging cream. You know, why would a 26-year-old be now considering like anti-aging cream? But they do. And you're just like, what?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that is where we start living on the surface of our consciousness. We're not accessing the deeper truths of what we are. We're allowing all of our existential crises to be about superficial stuff, you know, because we're constantly consuming stuff that keeps us on the surface of ourselves.
Yeah.
And doesn't invite us into the depth of what it is to be in this realm.
Yeah.
Because what happens when you go into the depths of this realm? You might just accidentally find out that you are God.
There's
and then
actually,
you are free.
Yeah.
And then you cannot be manipulated. You become more and more, ever more incorruptible.
We could do a whole episode on corruptibility, because this is like the direction, right? It's like, it's about corruptibility. If you're like influenced by, because we've used these words. What time are we on? I guess we'll bring it to a close, because we could talk for forever, and you will be back. Of course, we've got different topics that we like to discuss. But this idea of corruptibility and influence being like a lot more passive, could be good natured. You can be influenced by your peers. You could be influenced by someone's emotional state. They're not necessarily choosing to feel anxious in a way that makes you anxious. Like, that's an influence, and that's one thing. Manipulation implies there's more of a directness to it. Some people unconsciously develop manipulative behaviors. We all do.
Yes.
From some degree, because we've adapted to our environments.
Yes.
Some people who are a lot more vindictive in nature might consciously manipulate people. And then there is that manipulation on a societal level, in terms of creating a kind of compliant society. And that's a truth that a lot of people don't really like to face.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like to accept that, because it's almost like you have to then admit, it can feel like you're admitting some kind of self-perceived failure, but it's really not. Like, this stuff is entrenched.
Yes.
And to step back from it is really difficult.
Yes.
But the idea of cultivating a state, being able to cultivate that state, understanding your own godlike capability, your own sovereignty, your own freedom, is the freedom from undue influence, the freedom from manipulation, and really knowing yourself and being able to be the frequency that the world needs, to be the divine orchestra, to play out the sound that's going to resonate with people, that will remind them of who they are, so they can pick out their own instrument.
Yeah. And that sound is like, everyone has their unique song. You know, it's the song of their heart. And the heart is a portal, and it's connected to the heart of the world. You know, as I said, I think also in The Alchemist. And often how we return to ourselves, like, we've come into this incarnation knowing that we're going to meet certain people, and those people will catalyze us into our own remembrance. We will have multiple awakenings as we move through life. And on the topic of manipulation, this is a very vast topic, because I work in the field of empowerment. You know, that's what I do. And you could say that empowerment is a form of manipulation. You know?
How so?
In that it just depends on how it is that you want to discuss or look at it. And ultimately, it is opening yourself up to new ways of perception, new ways of perceiving. So there are more empowering ways that are aligned with natural radiance. The more empowering ways of being that are more aligned with natural radiance.
She's back again. The dog.
Hey, Luna, stop.
Has she been influenced by your command, or is she free?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's so. It sounds manipulated.
She's doing it again. No, she's incorruptible.
She's not unmanipulatable. Is that a word?
Yes, it is.
Perfect.
But the thing is that we do open ourselves up because we are able to form ourselves. And why are we in a collective? Why are we in a community? Because we do want to be influenced by each other. We do want to learn from each other. We do want to play with each other. We do want. Why do we have teachers? We surrender ourselves to our teachers also, you know, to provide us with lenses and ways of seeing, being, thinking, feeling that are actually going to align us more to what we're discovering as our true self, you know. And so we gravitate towards people that represent, maybe someone that represents innocence, that is a vibe that you want to encourage more of in yourself. Maybe you gravitate to somebody that's just super fucking radiant, or maybe you gravitate towards a teacher that is just hilarious, you know, or towards someone that's actually very, very calm and peaceful and stable and still. Because we are learning, we are living transmissions for each other. And to be open to a living transmission is to open yourself up to be transformed. And so that can also be seen as manipulation, but it's chosen.
And it's also, I feel like it's more on the influence scale, and you think of this term now, like we use influencer, but like generally someone on social media who, they might be, what do they do? Well, generally influencers are quite generally superficial stuff, right? And I love this, what you've described, because it's this crossover between freedom and sovereignty and cultivating that, and almost not wanting to be influenced against your will, or in a way that it leads to something unskillful or undesired. But then there is an element of, I am willing to be influenced in certain ways by the people that reflect things to me I need. And that if we're all consciously influencing each other, that's a process of harmonizing the sound collectively with our own individual unique instruments. It's like if someone's got a trumpet, and they're like, I've got my unique instrument is a trumpet, and then they walk in a room with loads of people that are like playing the piano lightly, and right, that's disruptive. So the person that with the trumpet has to learn, like, there's a time and a place to really use this gift in a way, and a way to adapt it. Does that make? I feel like I'm losing that.
But it does make sense. But to also add this extra kind of layer of the one with the trumpet, if they feel super like they themselves in this moment are an instrument and they come in and they play, it could be that they have been placed there to create a shift, because it doesn't, like, it can, this metaphor is kind of assuming that the people that are playing the piano are doing the thing that's aligned, that they're the ones that are to be harmonized too. You know, but sometimes if you are in your radiance and the vibe of a room is like meh, and you step in, you have to get meh in order to create harmony? Or can you actually choose to remain with yourself and be disruptive to create harmony, to uplift a situation? There's also that, you know. And
in playing, you're saying this, and the image I've got now is, like, just to build on this, the people playing the piano are attached to the idea of being a pianist and playing a certain tone. And if someone does walk in playing the trumpet, there are other people in the room that are like, I actually quite like jazz. Maybe I'm gonna play my instrument. You know, I've got like a bass guitar that I'm gonna harmonize with this person. And the people on the piano are like, actually, I've been playing the same tune for a while. maybe now I'm going to change. I'm going to try this and just see how it is. I'm going to try playing to this jazz kind of riff, and see how that influences me.
Yes. You have people that have a blueprint, and this it is anyone, but there are people that are actually that carry this blueprint of being provocative, of being disruptive, and that is to be able to create a shift in a space, to shake up the conditioning, to shake up what is happening there, and as a creative invitation for humanity to evolve. And it can happen in small situations. It can happen in a jam session, for sure. It can happen at a talk. It can happen, I don't know. It can happen in a cafe. If there's someone that walks in that is particularly vibrant and is just saying hello to lots of people, it can brighten everybody. It can bring people out of their personal stuff and into a more expanded state. We are here to catalyze each other. We're here to be love. And it can be triggering for some people when they're in the presence of somebody that is giving themselves permission to show up in their brightness. That can trigger. If the trumpet player comes in and is like, no, this feels true for me. That is going to trigger people. Sometimes someone taking up space can trigger someone that is so used to not taking up space, is so conditioned that it's bad to take up space, but what they truly want is to actually be able to take up space. They will make that person wrong, for sure.
I'm thinking of Soul, the Disney film, for whatever reason. That's about this musical process being a very soulful process, embodiment. I'm conscious of the time wrong, so I know you've got a time limit, Sanya. But so I'm gonna kind of bring it into a neat package. I feel like if this was a song, it would be very much punk rock with some then like classical. It's like my Spotify playlist, like tracks. It's very eccentric. It goes all over the place, but it's actually coherent in its own way. But I just wanted to acknowledge this idea of disruption being an act of courage. And we're kind of in a time where people that are disruptive, they're the ones told to leave the room. But society needs disruption in exactly the way that you explain it. It needs to be unsettled in a skillful way, in a respectful way, if possible. It's not always the case, but we need to see what shakes, what happens when there's disruption. What can we see from that movement? Can we learn new riffs? Can we learn new chords? We don't have to just accept all of that, but disruption can lead to a lot of growth.
And just to add,
this is going to be never going to end.
Is that collectively, just as we are as individuals, we are going through a kind of breakdown in our identity. So we are in a dark night of the soul. We are having to die to ourselves collectively. And there are people here present, as lighthouses that are going to support us in getting through this together, But the old paradigm, the old structure, the old identity will fight for itself. And it will demonize and label and other the more empowering aspects that are actually asking for us, that are supporting us in our disillusion and reemergence, as something that is more unified. So to be in your heart with this process also means to be able to see when an old structure, an old way of being, thinking is actually then turning itself, it's turning on the aspect of itself that is actually the heart whispering. And so there are teachers here present. We are also, when we talk about these things, we risk ourselves. We risk being made into that or seen as that. It's okay. And there are many spiritual teachers that have been completely just castrated. Because they have actually wanted to support a shift, support empowerment, and I think that's something to simply be aware of.
Well, it makes sense considering what we've explored around the fear of psychological death. These people are literally presenting the option of psychological death to what is old, and that is going to get a lot of resistance from people. And I think that a real grounding in sovereignty and discernment is needed, because there, of course, there are spiritual teachers that aren't, they're maybe under the influence of their own shadow, their own agenda, but there are many that are confused for that.
Yes.
Because of the frequency that they are, or what they're sharing is such a challenge to the status quo.
Yes.
Same with like scientists.
Yes.
Same with artists.
Yes.
Disruption is necessary for all of these things to evolve.
Yeah. In order for you to become yourself, in order for you to expand, you have to disrupt who you are. As Joe Dispenza says, you have to break the habit of being yourself. You know, like, and that's important. And so sometimes when we're in our own little circle, in our own little comfort zone, we're not going to.
Echo chamber.
Echo chamber.
Follow the sound metaphor.
Yeah. And so to be open to influence of people that appear bright to you, that make the whisper of your heart louder. When you hear them speak, it sounds like your heart, actually. You know, it does something. It lights something. It loosens something. It causes some sense of release. There is some recognition. There's a little bit of remembrance.
Yeah.
You know, that's a breadcrumb.
That's a really beautiful way to draw this to a close. So follow the breadcrumbs. Yeah,
you laid them up for yourself. It's safe to follow them.
Yes. I'm going to start talking again. We'll do it again. We've taken time. I've been really it's strange, like having you know, I know you so well, and I just I sometimes feel more nervous in the beginning if it's someone that I know. But I'm also really just pleased that we've done this, because I wanted to just share you with people that follow Mind That Ego, and I really value your ability to be courageous. I value your ability to make this bridge and to live in a heart-centered way. I really do, and it's inspired me greatly. And you're welcome back anytime. We've done it now. This is like the first one, so there'll be more to come, definitely.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you so much, Sanya.
It's been a pleasure.